Steve, thanks very much. That really does bring us full circle, because there's an awful lot of what Steve has been describing that I know I would like to put to the panel who will be joining me on the stage in a moment. And I think that you'll find some of the questions will be elements that have been touched on today and we need to drill into further, and some of them may be fresh. But it won't be complete without your input. So if you would like to, at any point, have a question put to the panel, just put your hand up and I'll get to you as soon as I notice you. So I have plenty of questions for them. Without further ado, I'd like you to welcome to the stage Baard Eilertsen, who is CEO of Maingate and has flown in from Stockholm. Jim Morrish. Jim Morrish, who is a director of the research company Machina Research. Dr. Gareth Noyes, who we've heard from already and I would like to hear more from. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Wind River. And to complete the expertise that we have available to us today, Sven Krey, who is Head of International Sales Development at Deutsche Telekom's M2M Competence Center. Steve, are you able to join us as well? I'd be most grateful if you could. Steve Priestley, EMEA Managing Director of Wireless. So, as I'm sure you'll agree, it's quite an array of M2M talent here, and we're very grateful for their time. Without further ado, we have a lot of questions to get through. I'm very happy to put questions from you as well. But before we drill down into individual industries, gentlemen, and their challenges, I want to be sure that we've seen the big picture correctly. The keynotes looked at changes in technology and they looked at business challenges. One of the things that was only touched on after a while was that we are yet to cover customer demands fully. And I wondered if, Baard, I could perhaps start with you. Would you mind giving us your views on whether or not you feel, as an industry, if one can loosely term M2M a single industry, and probably one can't, do you feel that as an industry we are addressing customers' demands, or are we just parading a set of technologies and potential solutions?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Let's move on.
No. First of all, Maingate, I'm probably the only one, well, amongst them who hasn't presented what we do yet. But just to give you a short picture, we're from 1998, we're a virtual mobile operator solemnly focusing on M2M applications in the Nordic region. And we're the number one in the Nordic region. We have around 1,500 different applications we support. Nowadays, as well as being an operator, we're also becoming one of the leading energy control system suppliers in the European market, elevating on the M2M experience we have. We've done this for so many years. We've gone through all the different technology stages. I mean, since 1998, we've been, talking about M2M. The big problem we see is, it's a technology discussion. According to me, M2M is dead. I'm sorry to say, but it's dead. Now we reinvent the word, or the three-letter abbreviation. We call it IoT, the Internet of Things, or everything. Still, it's very much technology-driven. It's an inside-out process where we tend to forget. I actually like your thinking around it, that we turn the data into information and the information into knowledge, but knowledge to whom? Because we let out the biggest stakeholders of the world, which actually Cisco pointed out, all the billions and millions of people. So we have an inside-out look at it, and when we do that, we look top-down. We never actually look at how this, if we say technology, actually can contribute to better standard of living, educational, all these issues that actually I think about for my children, and you think about for your families, and we think about, for the world population. And we have a tendency to forget it because it's so fun to play with technology.
I thought Cisco's presentation was interesting for its concentration when talking about one of the case studies, looking at how in the smart cities there is now an increasing engagement by Cisco with the individual mayors. And it was, if I have a criticism of this, it was that is still not the consumer, that we're still not drilling down to the end user who may or may not understand the value of the data that could be presented to them about availability of parking spaces.
And I agree with you there, because you and I talked about this. I mean, what we heard, I'm not going to criticize Cisco, because I think the initiative in this is tremendous.
No,
it's,
it is.
a very good starting point. But when the business case was presented, it was presented in such a way that, very few people pay for parking space. And, the business case was built around making people, or actually the city making money out of paid parking places. But, I mean, what's the problem? Shouldn't we instead, or at the same time, teach, consumers about, environmental impact of taking your car into town, congestions, etc., etc.? And I think we are missing that perfect link, because when that link is closed, that's when you will see volume growth. That's when you will see people taking M2M, as you said, the infrastructure which is invisible, will take it into use, because we don't understand it.
Sven, you had a good set of slides that showed how much Deutsche Telekom has done to take the technologies that you offer to a large numbers of millions of consumers. What role can an organization such as yours, which has the consumer engagement with millions of customers, what role can you play in engaging customers with the potential of the IoT, or the Internet of Everything?
Yeah. I would start with an answer to this situation that only the consumers are enabling the mass market. So in the IT business, I'm 100% sure that the most IT companies do a lot of their business with other businesses. And that is something what we experience in the machine-to-machine specific, that still the suppliers supply each other to build up this scenarios. And yes, machine-to-machine has in some segments reached the mass market through telco operators. As well, a lot of things failed because telco operators for IT propositions are not the expected channel for the consumers. So we are good for the mobile phone on one side, but probably we are not good for technical equipment. We are not the channel for cars. We are not the channel for health products. We try this as telcos, the whole industry tries this, but perhaps other channels have to be involved to make consumers satisfied. So this channel game is probably a not enough discussed story. That is what you indicated a little bit, because the cooperation with wireless is a lot about how can we do as a telco more business in connectivity on one hand. On the other hand, it's about solving problems. As you mentioned, if there is no connectivity from us, but we can sell solution, we can provide something, then for sure we want to have solution business and we don't care about telco business. And in combination, most of the things we do, as you mentioned, is still B2B business. There is less consumers purchasing the machine-to-machine solution. But for sure, this will change over time. Because many of the IT businesses started with the corporates, where IBM set the scene with introducing PCs or something like this, and then it went through the customer pyramid picture, starting from corporates as the top and has a base in consumers. And similar as it happened with IT, it will happen with certain M2M use cases.
Gareth, I saw you nodding earlier. Was there anything that you wanted to add on this debate?
Just that I think I think it's a matter of setting expectation around your question, which is I think machine-to-machine services are available to consumers, so they're just not packaged as such, and I think that's quite appropriate. So let's think about washing machines that are sold with service contracts with predictive maintenance. It's not billed in any way to the consumer as being a machine-to-machine application, but it's an example of the infrastructure that provides that. And I think some of the frustration, though, is that we see a bigger picture of something that's much more grandiose and much more ubiquitous, where we see the sort of rapid innovation we've seen with the World Wide Web at the machine level. And that requires moving way beyond proprietary vertical solutions into having an open platform, an open ecosystem. And I think that's the thing that's fundamentally lacking. And until we get that, I don't think we're going to have the sort of innovation that really provides new applications that's going to delight the customer. And that ultimately, that's the excitement of what we're doing here. And just to point out, to be fair, it's not it's not for lack of will, but I think the business model has to be aligned to make that happen. If I think about what's been happening in digital living for the last 2 decades, it's been incredibly hard for, even when there is a very well identified market and very specific use cases of watching TVs and other things in your living room, none of these systems talk to each other. So even when there is a compelling business case, it's not always in the value chain's best interest to make that happen. So I think we've got to temper our enthusiasm for a future that we can all imagine with the business model realities that enable that to happen.
Thank you. Jim, you're at Machina Research, you're in an enviable position to be able to see the big picture. Unless there's anything else that you'd like to add on the drivers, and feel free if there is, I'd also like to ask you what you see as the obstacles to growth. We've talked about some of them, the growth in M2M services I'm thinking of. What do you think are the biggest problems facing those who are trying to deliver profitable, and I underline profitable, new M2M services?
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Can I respond to the first question
yes,
first?
Yes, please do.
In terms of driving adoption, and I'll pick on something you alluded to, or you mentioned in your introduction to this whole afternoon, which is about the concept of the M2M market. Because I don't think it exists. It shouldn't exist. We're not talking about an M2M market. What we're talking about, effectively, to pick up on a particle physics analogy, is a projection into the M2M dimensions of something which really are a series of processes, applications, solutions, new products, new services, anything you can mention which has to what we would term some element of M2M in it. And the problem with saying what is it that drives the M2M market is that the answer, or what customers want, is that the answer is so diverse. So I've been noting down as we've run through the panel so far, some of the drivers. So next thing I'm going to do is reinterpret the question of what does the customer want to what are the needs of the end users and what is driving the adoption. And that comes back to a whole bunch of things which are driven by businesses, which are in terms of new products, cost reduction, R&D, future products to input into the development of future products, to drive stickiness, particularly in the automotive industry. And again, regulations could be the driver of M2M solutions, particularly in healthcare in France, with the case of sleep apnea, in eCall throughout Europe, in many situations where regulations are driving adoption of these connected solutions. There's customer demand in terms of better services or services that are enabled. There's competitive advantage in terms of improving one product versus another. There's green agenda and saving of the planet, reducing fuel consumption, cutting time for finding parking spaces within cities. You've got competition within the marketplace itself. So the fact that the M2M, I've said it myself now, the fact that the M2M marketplace is being competed so fiercely, that actually drives consumer need, consumer awareness, and the development of attractive propositions for consumers and other users. You've also got strategic imperatives. So you've got the aging population and the need to reduce the cost of supporting those people. They have a specific need. It's and it's a government need, and it's a societal need, and it's about reducing the cost of supporting elderly people in their homes, or reducing the cost of supporting elderly people overall. And probably that means keeping them in their homes for longer. There are all sorts of other factors that actually drive the purchasing of these applications. So in the case of an assisted living solution, it could be the guilt of, frankly, people like us that we can't spend enough time looking after our parents, so you're going to deploy a connected solution to do part of that job for us. So the question of what is driving the market is just so fragmented. The only way to actually go through it is to go through piece by piece and understand what the drivers are, what the barriers are, and how to grow the piece of the market that is relevant to the company that is engaging in it, rather than how do we grow a connected universe of devices overall, because I don't think that helps us much.
Yeah, Steve, you referred in your speech to, in your presentation, to no one size fitting all. Jim has just made a very eloquent description of how there is no one set of problems, there is no one there for one set of solutions. Out of the ones that he's identified, which are the ones that resonate with you? Which are the things that your customers bring to you as the key problems?
Yeah, and I think, I'll answer that in two ways. I think the team have made an interesting set of comments, and I think what we're really saying is that M2M is a three-letter word for a mess. And what I mean by that is, at the end of the day, we have solutions that fit multiple stratas of the technology, whether they're business to business, whether they're business to consumer. And the solution should be the starting point, and I think that's Baard's kind of main premise. It's the solution that starts out, and the benefits of the solution to the person you're trying to solve the problem for. And as an example, we term everything as e-health. Well, e-health is a set of 20 or 30 different solution sets. And as an example, we're working on picking up on your elderly care in instances like dementia and Alzheimer's. Well, it's a simple set of problems that you're trying to solve. These people want freedom, they are vulnerable, and the people who care for them, whether that's a health specialist or a family member, want to know where they are and how to support them in the event of a problem. It isn't a mobile phone, but it includes part of a mobile phone. It isn't a passive tag where they fall over and it creates an alarm to something, because it's a more interactive tool set. It can't be based around a single thing like a GPS technology where if they go in a building, the GPS doesn't work and all of a sudden you've lost the person in a shopping mall. So there's a whole bunch of technologies that come to solve some of these solution problems. And unfortunately what happens is you then have to fit a financial model, whether it's an outright purchase or it's a monthly prepayment or it's a managed service and a capital equipment. And I think what our industry's got to do is lead people through the solution definition and how we create solutions in a far more professional and beneficial way, such that we're solving the needs. And I think the industry as a whole has got to take charge of that and build products that make problems go away in an easy fashion.
I guess what we've tried to do in the opening comments, in the opening salvo, is to describe the impossible. It's an M2M market, which has been beautifully put as a three-letter word for a mess. And it is indeed that. Let's try and get away from M2M. Let's start talking about some specifics. This is an area that I know is of particular interest to you, Baard, but also to others, I'm sure. Smart metering. There are proven solutions here. There are utilities who could be encouraged, and probably are being encouraged very firmly by certain M2M service providers, to raise awareness and consumer demand amongst their customers. Where's the logjam? Where's the logjam in this, Baard? Why are we not seeing greater rollout of smart metering?
First of all, living in a country who has 100% penetration of smart meter, being promised that we would lower our consumption, it would be cheaper in the future to buy energy, we would save the environment. Nothing of that came through. I think there's a bit, we don't really trust the utilities when they tell us, or the government, that we're switching now all the meters into smart meters, because at the end of the day, I mean, if you have a higher IQ than 50, you can open a door. That means you can open a door that actually goes inwards. You actually understand that this meter is not going to change your behavior. I think it comes back to it, because, I mean, even in Sweden, if you, at first, when they changed all the meters, you could, be sentenced 2 years if you, touched the meter. So it was hands off, and everybody was told that, we're doing this meter change. It's, we're doing it to improve the environment. We're doing it to improve your standard of living, save your money. But don't you dare touch it. Don't you dare go near it, because, you can have a 2-year jail sentence. And that's how it started. And I see the same in the UK. I saw it in the Netherlands. Obviously, they stopped it. The privacy discussion in the UK, the privacy discussion in Germany. You see it all over Europe. And the fact that the utilities don't really want to roll out smart meters, because what is it good for? Seriously, they don't see the value in it. I know the value in it. I've done it. I've done several projects. I've seen it all happen, and I've seen that, before they've done it, they can't see the value, because they have not been able to turn their business logic into understanding that this, if we call it technology, wonderful technology, and data streams actually contributes to improving their business. And they can't see it before they've done it. And I think that is what's hindering it, because, I mean, I sit with, 300 utilities a day. I mean, we talk to basically all utilities all over Europe on a daily basis. I think I'm meeting 3 of them tomorrow in the UK. And they say, the regulator says we have to do it. We don't want to do it. There's no sense in us doing it, because it doesn't give us any advantage, not competitive advantage, no operational efficiency. One example in Spain, that's a good example, by the way. I asked the managing director of a grid company, I said, well, listen, how do you get your meter values? He said, I'm smart. I get all the pensioners in an area, I hire them. And I asked them, once a week, and just walk around this small area and knock doors and, just write up the meter value and just, call it in. I said, so what do you pay for that? Per meter? I said, per month is around 20 euro cent. No, it wasn't, 2 euro cent, sorry. 2 euro cent per month, per meter? And he said, and you're here to sell me what? I said, no, forget about it. It just doesn't cling together. And that's what we see. Not even the companies that we know the energy sector, as all the analysts says, is, potentially the biggest growth in using, if we call it M2M, they can't see it. I'm sorry about it. We haven't been able to tell them the effects. We're not, as an industry, we're not good enough to understand how our solution affects the business models, the business logic, and how we can improve their business processes in utilizing this technology.
Sven, as a head of international sales development for M2M in Deutsche Telekom, that sounds like a pretty stiff challenge. Is that something that causes you concern, or is that not really a challenge after all?
Yeah, the question always is what is exactly you want to offer. So if the offer starts from insourcing the whole IT of the utility into the company, then probably at the end you don't care if that includes smart metering or not. So what we tried is probably even together we try to place offers for either pure connectivity into a metering solution, or on the other hand into full IT insourcing, outsourcing. Having said that, there's a very a challenging situation if you have a regulation at the beginning saying something has to happen in a market, and from the perspective of the people who are regulated, there is no use case, and that is obviously on both sides, on the utility side and as well on the consumer side. So my personal belief is it will happen. Something will happen. So there's always a story that in Italy, smart metering went well, and after they did electricity, they now do gas because of the theft of electricity and gas, and metering hindering this. Immediately there is a business case and something happens. I'm not an expert about Nordics. I think there was pure regulation and power pushing it into the market.
Same as in Italy.
Yeah. Theft as well.
They don't steal as much in the Nordics.
We don't steal anything.
Then most likely, probably you will have to wait. Probably concentrate then as a community of people being able to provide components and then switch to another market. So insurance in the US. Remote control on cars is well working. It's somehow working, or there are a lot of trials in Europe, but it seems to be a different overall setup. So another learning, and I totally agree with the speed saying it's very fragmented. But from the IT perspective, there always have been people selling into these segments certain IT solutions. So now that telecommunication people add something into the solution, that does not automatically generate a situation that we can standardize it and change the different market or the different segments. We have to stay within the individual needs of customers in solutions. And that will not change through machine to machine. That is something that will probably be there forever. Yes, everything is connected to the internet, but the way how we connect the things to the internet, what we probably describe as machine to machine, is not standardizing the use cases behind.
Gareth, we seem to be back in the world of IT and data. Is this an example of where you were saying the big data paradigm doesn't scale?
I think it is. I think it's also an example of the other comment I was making, which is you need closed-loop systems. I think part of your question is, where's the value in smart metering? Well, there's clearly a value to the people who own the infrastructure from a cost-reductive perspective, but I think we were sort of confusing that with what's the value to the consumer. And the value to the consumer only becomes apparent when the consumer can do something about their behavior. And I think there are models where customers have shown a willingness to do something about their behavior from a green perspective. For instance, with a Nest thermostat. I don't know whether it's available in Europe, but a few $100 thermostat with a web service, and those things are flying off the shelf at a few $100 a pop, because consumers can actually do something about their heating and sort of energy consumption behavior.
Yeah, that makes all the difference. It's true interactivity. Baard, you wanted to say something on that?
Yeah, and I think when we talk about smart meters, it's, well, I've said this for many years, it's not about the processor power, the memory capacity of the technology in the meter itself. It's what you do with the data that you're able to collect. And Nest is a brilliant example. Another example is what E.ON has done in the Nordics with their customer engagement program, where they visualize the consumption in real time to make people change, understand in real time what their behavior, consumption pattern and behavior is, and make them do the changes for them. So I think that's where you see it brings value.
Okay, let's move on a little bit. I'm old enough and ugly enough to remember some of the 3G shenanigans that went on in the telecoms industry. Jim, sometimes as an industry we get overexcited, and I include myself here, about new technologies. It's the trait of engineering-led markets. How important is it that we also spend some time improving our business processes? Not just worrying about the technology or the latest three-letter acronym, but looking to achieve efficiencies, to cut costs, to streamline our services through process improvement?
I think there's a very similar answer to this one to my previous answer, which is that in every case and in every instance, the M2M conclusion or the M2M implementation is the conclusion of some wider business case or need. To analyse M2M in an isolated and standalone way simply makes no sense. So it has to happen like that.
Are there any particular verticals that you'd like to single out?
Where M2M has to be analysed in context of a wider business case?
Yes.
I mean, it is ubiquitously true. I suppose smart metering is an extreme example to refer to a previous topic of discussion, because basically, to a certain 99% exception, most developed nation households have a smart meter. You're therefore into something of a zero-sum game, whereas in the case of car insurance, as mentioned by Sven, what you're introducing is a competitive differentiator between two different companies competing for the same customer's business, and that really makes a difference as to who's going to win that revenue or not. Those are probably two extreme examples of the impact of M2M. One where it just probably deflates the money that goes to the industry, and if you assume a constant margin, that means less profit, probably inflates the price of the customer a bit because the meter's a bit more expensive, whereas another one where it actually transforms the competitive dynamics.
Steve, you mentioned e-health earlier. I was going to come to it later, but now's a very good moment. One of the things that has always troubled me about e-health is understanding who the customer is. Who's the customer, particularly since healthcare provision varies from country to country, never mind from continent to continent. Do you find that there is a challenge there in delivering a service by, first of all, identifying who the end user or who the payer is?
Yeah, I think it actually plays to everything that's just been said, whether it's energy, transportation, or whatever it is. If you pick on telematics as a bunch of things that gives you location, date, time, direction, speed, or whatever it might be, it's actually only when you get into a set of applications that make sense of that data. So, for example, if I manage a fleet and I want to know where the truck is and what route it took and whether I can optimize that to save fuel, that's one thing. If I'm an insurance company that can use that same data to say, you know what, you never went on a motorway, and for that benefit, I'm going to give you a discount on your insurance. And by the way, I can't discriminate based on age and gender anymore in Europe. How am I going to differentiate my product? So I think what we've got is these competing set of priorities for a very similar set of technologies. And actually what you've got is other parts of the industry are starting to create solutions that satisfy their business needs. And I think we've all mentioned the fact that at some point we have to understand those business needs. And as an example in health, if I'm 20 years old, and I'm not obviously anymore 20 years old, but if I were, and I was happy to put all of my life on Facebook, and I was happy to be completely open and public about everything I do, and I was going to take care of somebody, all I'd really want is an app on my Android, on my Windows, or my iPhone, and that would be my need. I wouldn't care that there was a bigger set of data, that there was a broader application and portal. I'd be happy with that. If I'm an elderly person suffering from dementia, all I want to know is if I press a red button, somebody's going to come and get me. And if I'm a healthcare provider, what I'm really interested in is I'm a healthcare provider in a niche single care home, or I'm a private health insurer, or I'm a national health service provider, or I'm a government provider. These things are all driving a core set of data points into differing sorts of applications with different price points, different business models, and different things. And I think what we've got to do as an industry is to understand how we take the core technology proposition and translate it into a set of solutions that people will buy. And how that channels to market, some of it's yet to be proven. Telematics through user-based insurance, through the insurance industry, is a well-known piece. And I think the thing that, to Baard's point earlier, the thing we've got to remember in all of this is, for all the multiple stakeholders in the process, there has to be a what's in it for me moment. What am I getting from this? What am I prepared to buy? And I was at Cisco in the 90s, and we did the connected home, and we had the first internet fridge and internet microwave and all of those kind of things. It was a great concept in the 90s. And some of those concepts have gone forward. But what's really interesting is that if you look at Cisco's business as it's morphed over time, it's a premium product with a premium price sold into a premium market, and it doesn't deviate from that too much. It knows its market, it knows where, and we've got to get to that stage, knowing what our market is and providing solutions and technological solutions into that space.
Let me add one thought, because just we have to be careful that with some probably arrogance from whatever industry, we ignore that other industries exist. So if we discuss health, then they have electronics mounted to people for much longer time than we have GSM networks, like these pacemakers for the heart control. Now we connect them with certain solutions, not with a SIM card implanted, but with other solutions. But for sure, we have to ask them how they sold their peacemakers before. What was the process? How does the industry work? And then we can, as you mentioned, can help them to have more with M2M or better propositions or position us right. But there are individual markets. Health has nothing to do with energy, is my view. and they have their own industries and their own thinking and their own channels and their own expectations, and we have to stay with this.
No, I would agree with that, and I think my only contention is that actually some of the underlying pieces of that are common to everything.
It's horizontal. Sure.
It's completely horizontal, and we think of this industry in a verticalized fashion. It's actually only the application that's verticalized. The technology is completely horizontal.
Now, the verticalization of it is understanding the business process you affect. But what you deliver is, as I said, we deliver some 1,200 different applications where our M2M services are used. But I mean, we don't have 100 different platforms. We have one. Yeah. But it's the knowledge about the business processes you impact and how you can actually relate that back into the services you deliver. That's what's the verticalization of it. Yeah. I mean, I deliver the same service for smart meters I do for parking meter. Same logic.
Yeah. Jim, I know you've done a lot of work lately on service delivery platforms and the arguments around horizontalization and verticalization. Do you want to pick up on what Baard was saying?
Yep, absolutely. I tend to agree. It is, M2M is still a serious. I mean, the applications are vertical. We're in a very vertical situation. What we are seeing, though, is we are beginning to see some network effects within those applications and some horizontalization. And some of the emerging players in this space. So something like a ThingWorks. And something like a Bosch systems integration, software innovation, are actually beginning to put together some of the building blocks that you need for applications, and beginning to horizontalize those verticals. Now, the applications are still vertical, the needs are still vertical and highly specific. The business cases are all very vertical, but we're beginning to get to a point where there is some commonality across the solutions in terms of the building blocks that support those solutions, I think. And that's going to take some while to become dominant, I think. I think there are going to be some steps in that direction around what we tend to call subnets of things rather than the full Internet of Things. To expect everything to connect to everything within the next couple of years is a little hopeful. But to expect to get some commonality in terms of approach to data communities that are built around either a smart city or a common platform or standard such as Continua standards or a common need such as supply chain integration, particularly in Singapore where they're pursuing this, we'll begin to get some kind of data communities and some kind of standardization and building blocks emerging within applications within those communities.
I know Baard would like to come back on that, and I will give you an opportunity in a second, but I want to ask Gareth to respond on this because we're talking about commonalities here in the IT space. What's your take on Jim's comments there?
I think to keep it short, I agree with what he's saying. I think we recognise there's a need for common infrastructure, and I think some of the frustration around how we look at this is we feel there could be so much more we can do. And I think it's about, you know, enabling and driving the pace of innovation. And I think if only we could come together and define those common platforms, then we all know intuitively that the innovation, the new business models, the new use cases, the new delivery of value would sprout. And I think that's why we're all here. We're trying to make that happen.
Okay, and Baard, you had something to say.
Yeah, it's just when we talk about standards, I gave up a long time ago to have a set rule of standards, global standards, where we could all work according to. But I know, because the industries we are trying to attract have their own standards within the industries, and that's why I'm saying that interoperability is what's going to create your horizontal platform. We cannot sit here and wait for, you know, all of us to agree on a set rules of standards. That's not going to work. We're not going to agree on a common infrastructure. What we can agree on is a common framework.
Can I just go on? I'm talking about a de facto set of standards, not anything that might get documented.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time, and if there are any questions from the floor, then please let me know now. We have about 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. But I wanted particularly to touch on the cost element regarding low-power, wide-area networks. Machina Research recently predicted that these networks could, and I emphasize could, make up 15.5 billion M2M connections by 2022 if there was full take-up and all the right circumstances prevail. Given that most estimates for the Internet of Everything, including Ericsson's and Cisco's, seem to suggest about 50 billion connections by 2020, that's still a huge chunk. Power consumption is clearly an issue. Jim, do you want to say briefly anything on this area? And then I'd like to ask Steve about it.
Yes, I will. Firstly, to comment on definitions. I mean, there is a very wide range of forecasts of the Internet of Things, connected devices, M2M, etc. Big difference between them tends to be the definition of what is counted. And we have a fairly strict definition of counting basically standalone integrated systems, which are connected, you know, via standards-based interfaces and are, you know, standalone integrated systems. I can run into the definition in more depth, but probably now's the wrong time. And on that definition, we think that there are about 18 billion M2M connected devices by 2022. So our number's quite a lot lower. So the proportion of it which is addressable by these low power wide area technologies is huge. It's a very significant proportion which is addressable, and in fact I think it's roughly 50 or 60% is addressable, but there's then a factor where these low power wide area nets can potentially accelerate the adoption of M2M connectivity, just because, you know, it's a lower price proposition. Compared to it's a lower price out of the box connected proposition compared to a mobile phone or a mobile 2, 3, 4G connected solution, which is probably the fairest comparison. So extremely significant opportunity if it can be executed. Is it the best way of getting the cheapest connectivity? Well, again, it depends on what the application is. I think to compare to some, if you're comparing to a situation where you're looking at alternatively putting in place a mobile 3G, 2G multi-mode modem because there's uncertainty about when 2G spectrum is going to get turned off, then yes, it's a pretty good way of reducing the cost. Particularly if you're in a business situation where, frankly, you're just looking at connecting your devices and stitching those into an integrated business process. If you are a manufacturer of white goods and you are looking at connecting these devices, well, the first thing you'd have to look at is whether there's an ecosystem that covers an entire region. Does the ecosystem for these new technologies cover all of Europe? And if it does, then yes, it's a very viable option. And if it doesn't, then frankly, you're looking at a lot of supply chain fragmentation or using some different technology, which could be something like a PLC, power line communication in-home solution. So Yes, they can be a very good way of reducing the costs, but it depends on the rollout, the presence of these networks, the ecosystems that develops around them, and the application that whoever is deploying the application is seeking to deploy.
Thank you.
Way to go to mature into an industrially ready technology. And you've got to bear this in context to all the things that have happened in the cellular or the Wi-Fi industry. The reason that cellular and Wi-Fi has commoditized to the point it has is because the volume of connections and the technology that underpins those connection methods have been tried and tested against hundreds of millions of devices. The technology that underpowers low-power radio today is new. It is costly to build embedded systems relative to the price per the connection. And there is a whole ecosystem that has to evolve that makes it viable. But I think in terms of low bit rate, asynchronous, perhaps moving to duplex communication paths, metering is a great example at the home, that it has a viable future if it matures well enough over the next few years. That would be my viewpoint.
And existing networks does not fulfill what is needed for this connection.
Well, I think
if operators could serve whatever is needed, then why invest new?
yeah, so my point about, well, my response to that, Sven, would be really simple, is that the evolution between 2G, 3G and 4G is being driven by a handset market at one hand and a cost of operation at the other. It's not being driven by M2M in any way, shape or form, other than in some very specific content-rich applications such as digital signage, digital media, on a generic basis. So you're right, but that means the MNO has got to change its business model to enable low power, low price, low bandwidth connectivity management tools in the context of it's not a handset managed network.
But industry politics, let's not discuss it.
Yeah, exactly.
Gentlemen, we've got 1 minute left, so I'm just going to run down the table, if I may, and ask you for your 10-second contribution, all five of you. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Baard?
I think this is a growing market, and I don't believe the figures I hear for certain reasons. But I think this is a growing market. We just have to make sure that we don't ruin it for ourselves, because that's what we're about to do.
Thank you. Jim?
I think that my summary would be just don't underestimate the fragmentation. No matter how close you look, no matter how closely you look at any aspect of this industry, I've called it an industry again. It will be more complex and more detailed and more different in different situations than you could really ever imagine.
Gareth?
My view is let's not sweat it. I think where good use cases and innovation are going to come about, I think it's going to happen. Let's not force it where it's not.
Sven?
So I totally believe in the size, and I totally believe that we do the right portion of the size. So let's continue and boost this business.
And finally, Steve?
I guess my comment is let's be bold. Let's not let what we think as inhibitors stop us taking charge and leading the change. And I think the more we are out there and bold and aggressive with it, the more people will get into it.
Out there, bold and aggressive is a very good way of describing our panel. I think they've been superb. So please join me in saying thank you to Baard Eilertsen, Jim Morrish, Gareth Noyes, Sven Krey, and Steve Priestley. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the sessions for today, and I just want to say a big thank you to all of you for coming and for staying and for hearing us out. Thank you for your interest and your attendance.